At the NFL Combine, Mike Macdonald hinted there's no such thing as too many pass rushers. The Seahawks doubling down by adding a tank to their defensive line. We're going to be breaking it all down here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here for our Wednesday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you as always, whether you are in Renton, Washington, or Biloxi, Mississippi. We appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks were much more active on the official first day of free agency. We got a couple of signings to break down, plus a third potential signing that may or may not be coming down the pipeline as well. We'll link that to the Seahawks offensive line game plan here early in the offseason. Jam-packed episode coming your way, so let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. At the NFL Combine, Mike Macdonald spoke about the need to continue adding to their defensive line. There's no such thing as too many pass rushers. The Seahawks doubling down on that statement today with a pretty big investment, at least if you look at the agent numbers, a 3-year up to $42 million contract for Demarcus "Tank" Lawrence. And Rob, look, I'm going to put some fanboy card out there. Anybody that listens to our show knows that I'm a Boise State fan. I've been a Boise State fan for most of my life. Demarcus Lawrence is one of the all-time greats from Boise State. Loved him as a college player. Never have really had much desire to root for the Dallas Cowboys, but it's hard not to root for Demarcus Lawrence just because of the way he plays the game. When I saw this move, and I actually was writing an article today arguing for him or Matt Judon, who had links to this coaching staff, didn't even get done with the article before this news was announced. This seems like the perfect complement to what the Seahawks have at the edge rusher position right now, because you can count on one hand the number of run defenders that are better at that position than Demarcus "the Tank" Lawrence.
That's a good point. And I think that's one of the things that the Seahawks certainly were very excited about. Look, this is an aging player. There's no question about it. He's going to be 33 on draft weekend. That was one of the reasons why, frankly, I was a little bit surprised that Seattle went in this direction. That said, this is a really good football player. This is the kind of guy who is a physical, tough guy. He is a 4-time Pro Bowler. The last time that he was healthy for a full season, 2 years ago, he was a Pro Bowler for the Dallas Cowboys. He is a guy that can set the edge, whether it be as a traditional hand-in-the-dirt defensive end, as a stand-up outside linebacker. He's played in both roles. To me, Corbin, he is a very similar player as Uchenna Nwosu, who is, of course, one of my absolute favorites on the Seahawks because of his physicality. And, I've had the opportunity, we talked about this before, as a scout for the, for the BC Lions. I have the opportunity to go to different NFL training camps. And look, Micah Parsons is clearly the elite defensive player for the Dallas Cowboys. But it was Demarcus Lawrence that really took my breath away at times in going to their training camp over the last couple of years. I love this signing for the Seahawks. I think that they are more physical. I think they're tougher. I think they're more versatile. I think this is exactly what you want Seattle to do. If they are going to not be able to sign one of these, exceptional offensive line prospects that everybody wants them to sign, then pivot and take the best player available, so to speak, to use a little bit of draft terminology to the free agency perspective. That's exactly what they did with Demarcus Lawrence. So I think that Seattle's defense is going to be that much more physical, bigger, tougher along the line of scrimmage. And again, that I think should have Seahawks fans, absolutely running to invest in season tickets, because this is an exciting signing by the Seahawks.
This is a both big addition for the Seahawks and a massive loss for the Dallas Cowboys, because he's been with Dallas for the past 11 seasons. You can make an argument that he's as popular of a player for Cowboys fans as there's been in the last 20 years in Dallas. I mean, this is a beloved player who has earned that reputation because of the way that he plays the game. He is just, we have thrown the term junkyard dog around before, maybe a little bit too lightly. This guy is the textbook definition of junkyard dog. And the way that he plays the game to the whistle, how physical he is. And this is what I think this compares to. When Mike Macdonald added Jadeveon Clowney 2 years ago, when he was the defensive coordinator in Baltimore, Clowney had a resurgent season in Baltimore. And he was perfect in that scheme because he brought the length. And, oh, by the way, Demarcus Lawrence is a very similarly built guy, really long arms, and he's got massive hands, 11-inch hands. Demarcus Lawrence, like, when this dude gets his hands on you, there's a thump because he's got a lot of width there. Like, this is a big dude. And he can create a lot of space right off the bat. Even though he's not the biggest defensive end, he is able to use those hands and those long arms to really create separation off the point of attack. And he's so good at shedding blocks. He's just a physical presence. And Jadeveon Clowney's the same way when he's healthy. I think that this is, I don't know if it's going to be replacing Uchenna Nwosu. We haven't heard anything on that front, but we've heard nothing on a restructured contract either for Nwosu. So maybe they're just going to move forward with the contract that he has. But whatever the case may be, this is a player that is going to dramatically improve your run defense just with his presence alone. 2022 and 2023, Rob, he was in the top 7 both seasons in run stops by edge defenders. He was second in 2022. And the sack numbers have not been there since 2019. He got a big contract after back-to-back double-digit sack seasons. He hasn't had more than 6.5 in a year since then. However, he had 3 in the first 3 games last year before he suffered a Lisfranc fracture in his foot. He looked like he was on his way to a bounce-back season. And now he's going to get to play for Aden Durde, who he played for 3 years in Dallas as the defensive line coach. And as you mentioned, 2 of those seasons, he was a Pro Bowler. Even if he didn't have the biggest sack numbers, 3 of the previous 4 seasons, he had at least 47 quarterback pressure. So he is still a very good pass rusher. Even if the sacks haven't always been there, he's disruptive. He gets into the backfield a lot, 49 tackles for loss since 2019. And like I said, you're not going to push this dude around. He is going to be a tone setter. Young guys in Dallas, Micah Parsons has raved about how he impacted his arrival in the NFL. This is another really good locker room guy to bring in with Jaron Reed and Nwosu that can really bring some of the youngsters like Byron Murphy II up. And in pass rushing downs, he can play inside too. Dallas has done that more the last couple of years than they did previously. I'm with you. I love this signing. I think that it is a fantastic gamble to take coming off of an injury that Lisfranc's fractures can be a little scary for older players. But from my understanding, he is completely healthy. He's been back running and working out. This guy is going to know how to play the game in this scheme because he has played for Aden Durde before. He's a smart football player. And I just think that he's going to have that infectious energy and physicality that this defense is looking for.
Yeah, again, I'm excited about this move for the Seahawks for a lot of reasons. You just touched upon one of them, and that's the familiarity in Aden Durde's system. And so the same reason why I was excited about Sam Darnold reuniting with Clint Kubiak, Demarcus Lawrence and his familiarity with Durde, the physicality. You touched upon the sack numbers, and the fact that he has last year he had 3 sacks in 4 games, 4 sacks the year before in 17 games, and so people are gonna be concerned about that. I'm not. I see a guy that not only has plenty of pass rush ability to him, his burst, his power, the way that he uses his hands. And so I'll mention this because I think that everybody focuses on sack numbers. And I love the fact that you just mentioned like the quarterback hits and the pressures and things like that. I love, and I've talked about this before, I love forced fumbles and I love passes broken up at the line of scrimmage. That is taking advantage of those long arms and those big hands, actually putting them to use, right? He's got 21 forced fumbles over his career. He's had at least 1 forced fumble every single year of his career, other than his rookie season all the way back in 2014. The pass is broken up. He's got 20 of those as well. So he gets his hands up into passing lanes that should be able to create big play opportunities for your linebackers, your safeties, your corners to be able to get pick sixes. And so to me, again, those are things that are every bit as important as actually sack numbers. So I really like this move by the Seahawks. I will say this again: he's going to be 33 on draft weekend. Seattle signed him to a 3-year deal, which, when it's all said and done, may wind up being a 2-year deal. That, to me, is the gamble here, and that's one of the reasons why I think that Seattle likely waited until today, the first day they could bring in players, because this is the first day officially of free agency where they could bring in players and have guys actually do the medical evaluation. That's why, again, I thought the Seattle basically pulled back a little bit on some of the offensive linemen that were signed elsewhere, as we talked about in yesterday's show, Corbin. So to me, this is Seattle doing their due diligence, making sure that he is over that Liz Frank injury, which has been a career ender for some people. Obviously, Seattle feels comfortable with the medical. I certainly believe that they feel comfortable with who this player is on and off the field. This is a game record. This is a guy who has been a very durable player. Started 17 of all 17 games each of the last 2 seasons prior to last year's Liz Frank injury. So again, I think that Seattle's defense, which I think was going to be good already, is going to be that much better with Demarcus Lawrence on the field for them.
$18 million in guaranteed money. And so again, when you're looking for the real contract numbers, it looks to me like this is a 2-year, $18 million deal is what it really boils down to. And that third year is a wait and see. Typically, you're not going to get to that opportunity. But if you could squeeze 2 more really good seasons out of Marcus Lawrence, he has a chance to really be a game changer for defense and already has really high expectations. When we come back, Lawrence was not the only player the Seahawks signed today. They also added some much-needed speed to their depleted receiving core. We'll be breaking down the addition of Marquez Valdes-Scantling coming up next here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Locked On Seahawks is sponsored by BetterHelp. Taking care of your mental health can feel like a big investment, but it's just as important as taking care of your body. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, but with BetterHelp, you can save up to 50% per session. BetterHelp offers a flat fee for weekly online therapy sessions, making professional support more accessible and affordable. With over 30,000 therapists and over 5 million people helped, it's the world's largest online therapy platform. Therapy has worked wonders for me in the past, but don't just take my word for it. Having someone in your corner to guide you when you're struggling to navigate obstacles can be invaluable. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s for tuning in, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. A much busier first official day of free agency for the Seattle Seahawks. As we just broke down, maybe the biggest addition that they've made, not named Sam Darnold, getting Demarcus Lawrence, defensive end, previously a Pro Bowler and an All-Pro for the Dallas Cowboys, adding him to their stable of talented defensive linemen. They also addressed the receiver position, which, Rob, you and I have talked about, trading DK Metcalf, cutting Tyler Lockett, not bringing back Cody White, at least for now, as an exclusive rights free agent. I mean, this is a team that had like 3 receivers on the roster going into today. And while this move is not going to be considered a splashing one, and I think at best he's Seattle's number 3 going into this year, this is, again, another player that brings a connection to the coaching staff. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who brings 7 years of NFL experience with him, including playing the last 8 games last year, in New Orleans. And that means he played for Clint Kubiak, and he was really productive for Clint Kubiak. After Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed went down, he became the de facto number 1 target in the receiving corps upon his arrival. And Derek Carr, the first few games before he got hurt, threw 3 touchdowns to him, including a 71-yarder. Rob, he had 4 touchdowns in 8 games playing for Clint Kubiak. And this guy is the ultimate textbook definition of feast or famine. I don't know that there's a player in the NFL at the receiver position that fits it better than what Marquez Valdes-Scantling does. The guy has had drop issues throughout his career. He's got around a 10% drop rate for his 7-year career. But since 2018, when he came into the league, for players with at least 200 catches, he's almost 2 full yards ahead of every other receiver in yards per reception, 17.4 yards per catch. He's not a high volume target guy. He's not overly efficient based on the fact that he's had, I believe, 4 seasons that he's been under a 50% catch rate. I mean, again, this is a feast or famine guy, but when he feasts, he makes big plays. 13 touchdowns of his 20 plus yards through the air. 33% of his catches in his career have been 20 plus yards through the air. So if you were looking for somebody that can help make up for DK Metcalf's big plays that are now gone, Valdes-Scantling is not DK Metcalf, but he's kind of one-on-one in terms of being a guy that could be that joker that has one trick that's really, really good. And Clint Kubiak seemed to know how to play to it last year.
Yeah, no question about it. I think that, again, there's a kind of expression in scouting, and I'm not a huge fan of it, so I apologize for using it here. But people will say, oh, he's a poor man's this, he's a poor man's that. I think that when you look at MVS or Marquez Valdes-Scantling, he is in some ways a poor man's DK Metcalf. Now, let's be clear. DK Metcalf had 48 touchdowns in 6 seasons. MVS has 20 touchdowns in 7 seasons. So again, I mean, he is not the same caliber of athlete, and he is not nearly as productive as DK Metcalf. That said, I mean, one of the reasons why I was kind of, critical of DK Metcalf in yesterday's show is that we've been waiting to see DK Metcalf become more of a full-fledged wide receiver. I mean, rather than just being the big play threat that could go over the top or, could be able to get a jump ball on somebody, then, be able to be a little bit more consistent on third down, catch the ball as cleanly as we've seen him splash and flash a little bit in preseason games or in training camp, but then not be able to actually translate that onto the field. MVS is kind of a guy that has been the same player the entire time he's been in the NFL. He has been basically a guy with 6'4", 205 pounds, running in the high 4.3s to low 4.4s, can absolutely take the top off of the defense. And that, to me, is his game. I mean, look, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and I believe the Seattle's going to be looking for another receiver, whether it be in free agency, maybe Cooper Kupp, maybe somebody in the draft, and possibly the number 18 overall selection. Those are going to be the wide receivers that should eat in Clint Kubiak's offense, as well as the tight ends, as well as the running backs. But if you're looking for a guy that can stretch the defense and force those safeties to play back, MVS is actually a very economical prospect for Seattle to bring into the fold. And I say prospect because he is still a guy that, has some rough parts to his game. As you mentioned, I mean, he is not the most reliable hands catcher. There are times where his routes drift. There are times where he wants to go deep rather than look back towards his quarterback and be able to work his way back and be able to kind of convert those third downs. But at the same time, again, if you are looking for a guy to be able to stretch the field, then this is one of the absolute best in that regard. He is a little bit of a trick shot kind of a guy, but he is among the best in that particular trick shot. So again, for what Seattle is paying him at this point in comparison to some of the other big play wide receivers in the NFL, I do think that this is a very exciting signing for the Seahawks, and one that suggests that Seattle is not this is not a rebuilding process. This is absolutely kind of just a reimagining of how they're going to be able to play offense. And again, as we talked about with Adam Durde and with Demarcus Lawrence a moment ago, we talked about with Clint Kubiak and, of course, Sam Darnold a moment ago. And you mentioned as well, with MVS, he has that familiarity with Clint Kubiak. He should be able to hit the ground running.
Yeah, both literally and figuratively. And look, we talked yesterday. I had Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings on to talk about Sam Darnold and Clint Kubiak's offense. And one of the things that he made clear that the Seahawks needed to do, they needed to get a receiver that could stretch the field and one that could run sideline to sideline that was going to create havoc with his speed. That is what Marquez Valdes-Scantling is going to be able to do. That 71-yard touchdown that he had last year was a 20-yard pass through the air, and he turned up field and ended up getting 50 yards for a touchdown. He's never been a consistent yak producer in his career. He's not going to make a lot of guys miss, but it's the speed, the breakaway ability. And just the fact that you have to account for that big play threat when he is out there, it opens things up underneath. And I think this is going to be big for Jackson Smith and Jigba when you can have a guy that can run safeties off, which Valdes-Scantling can absolutely do that. So this checks off that box that the Seahawks were looking for. As you know, I know he's a one-trick pony, but he's a very good pony at that one trick. And it really helps with this offense, especially when they're doing a lot of two receiver sets. You can use his ability to run off safeties and get corners vertical. That can create opportunities for your other receiver and for your tight ends. So I like the fit here, and we've got film that shows that he can play in this system. Clint Kubiak, again, he had 4 touchdowns in the first 4 games, and then when they had quarterback issues, the numbers went down. If Derek Carr plays all the last 8 games, he might have caught 6 or 7 touchdowns. Those 2 were on a roll before Carr went down. So I'm really curious to see how Sam Darnold handled this, because Sam Darnold had more yards through the air on deep balls than any quarterback in the NFL last year in Minnesota. He wants to take those shots. Valdes-Scantling is that guy that you will take those shots to, even if he's not been the most efficient in that regard. When he has caught the ball, he's been extremely prolific. He's had 2 years he's finished with north of 20 yards per reception. Again, the guy is just a chunk play machine when he's able to get his hands on the football, and he's just really good at that one trick. So I like this addition, and it sets Seattle up now, Rob, where either through free agency or when they get to the draft next month, now you're looking for that receiver that can excel on the backside dig routes, that can excel on the post and corner routes, that has some speed but has more ability underneath as well, that third complement. I can see somebody like an Elijah Moore in free agency still fitting the bill to be that. But then if you're looking at the draft, you can look at Harris from Ole Miss. I think that he is one that would make a lot of sense there. And also Jaden Higgins from Iowa State, I think would be a really fun receiver to complement with what the Seahawks have here. There's some other options that would make sense too, but this isn't to get a number 2 receiver, but Valdes-Scantling can be a very effective number 3 in this particular offense.
Yeah, no question about it. And again, to me, the selection here for the Seahawks that I think complements both what they have in JSN and now with MVS would be Luther Burden III. I mean, you know, Burden, Valdes-Scantling, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. I mean, you know, it kind of sounds like a lawyer firm. I mean, I get all of that. I don't care about any of that. I think that you still need a receiver who can make people miss, who can bowl people over. That's neither JSN's game or MVS's game. And so I think that Burden is that kind of a guy. I think that Matthew Golden is that type of guy. If you're going to be looking in the first round conversation, look, I understand the conversation about Tet McMillan from Arizona. To me, this is a very similar player in Marquez Valdes-Scantling to Tet McMillan, a guy that a lot of people believe is the very top receiver in this draft class. I don't think that he plays up to his size. I would argue the same thing with MVS. I think that his speed, rather than his 6'4" frame, is what makes him special. The same thing here with McMillan, for example. I think that he is very agile for a guy of his size. I think that he, again, can absolutely run for a guy of his size. I just don't see a lot of making people miss and be able to kind of shuck off defenders in that Deebo Samuel role. That's what I think that Seattle is lacking. And again, the player who I think in this draft class most matches up with Deebo Samuel is, again, Luther Burden III from Missouri, who I had in the last mock draft that we talked about. And I do think that he should be available to Seattle at number 18 overall. There are some other candidates. I look forward to kind of breaking some of those guys down with you. But I do think that this is a nice job of kind of setting Seattle up to be able to absolutely win on draft day.
When we come back, the Seahawks have yet to sign a starting offensive lineman, which I know a lot of fans, they're starting to get upset about that. Josh Jones, no offense to him, he's going to be your swing tackle. He's a George Fant replacement, but they haven't been able to get that bigger name that they can plug into the interior of the offensive line. Might that be changing, or is the plan not really to go that route? We're going to be continuing to dive into Seattle's game plan on the offensive line when we come back here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the course of the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or win a bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or Luka Doncic to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And for your second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now the season is over. Get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make it your second listen. The Seahawks, now a day into free agency, officially, they have added 4 players to this point. One of them was an offensive lineman, Josh Jones, who you and I are expecting is going to fill the George Fant role as the swing tackle. Stone Forsythe going to the Giants, so he won't be in that role for Seattle anymore. Josh Jones is going to be one taking that mantle for the Seahawks this upcoming season. But after losing out on Will Fries, and I was able to confirm it is Burgers and Fries. That's his last name. I've heard both Fries and Fries, but it is Fries. Not getting him, he signed with the Minnesota Vikings. There's been a lot of frustration among Seahawk fans. And it's understandable. The offensive line was not good at all last year. And Seahawk fans were wanting this abundance of cap space, a chunk of it to be used to upgrade the offensive line. They clearly were trying to do that with Will Fries. And as you were alluding to yesterday, not getting Fries now, you didn't think that they were going to be making any more real pushes to try to get another bigger name guard. Although we have heard Tevin Jenkins of the Bears that the Seahawks are very much in the hunt for his services right now. Nothing else concrete has come out. And from my understanding, Mekhi Becton, they are not going to be trying to sign him. So a lot of fans may be upset about this, but it does seem like that Will Fries and maybe Tevin Jenkins were the game plan if they were going to do anything. And now it's, you know what, we didn't get either one of those guys. Jenkins, maybe they still do, but if we don't get either one of those guys, we're confident in what we have and what's coming up in the draft, and we're just going to go that way and maybe add one more backup to this group rather than overspend for somebody that we don't necessarily want to spend that kind of money for up front.
Yeah, I think that this was a free agent guard class, Corbin, that Seattle could have taken advantage of, and they tried, and it just didn't work out for whatever reason. I also think that this is a draft class that is also very good in terms of guards, including an often lot of college tackles that are going to wind up sliding inside to play guard, the way that Will Fries did at Penn State. That's where he played the predominant, most of his career was at the right tackle position. And he had played a little bit of guard, and that's why I think that a guy like a Tevin Jenkins, who has shown that versatility, even a Josh Myers, who has been strictly a center with the Green Bay Packers, but you go back to his Ohio State days, he played center at the end, but he played a little bit of guard early on. I think that those are guys that should be somebody to consider, but at the same time, I don't believe that Seattle is looking at this like they have to sign an offensive lineman to save their season the way that some out there have expected. And part of that is just because of the reality of building an NFL roster. Here's the reality is that over the last 4 years, 3 of the last 4 years, the Seahawks have kept a total of 11 offensive linemen when it actually got to, the opening day 53-man roster. I think that the Seahawks have 9 offensive linemen right now that are essentially guarantees to make their roster. Of course, the couple of tackles and Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, Mike Jarrell, and then Josh Jones, who I agree with you. I think that is likely to be his spot as that swing tackle. And, of course, you got the 3 guards and Christian Haynes, Atoa Laumea, Anthony Bradford, all of them on rookie contracts, the same with everybody else I just mentioned other than Josh Jones, who's on a 1-year deal. And then you have the 2 centers and Jalen Sandell and Ola Oluwatimi. You can put them in whatever order that you want. I mentioned Sandell first because I think that he is a better fit in this system. I think all 9 of those players are essentially locks. So that leaves you at most 2 other spots that are likely to be in Seattle's initial 53. So if you were to sign a guy like a Fries, for example, then are you telling me that in the 10 draft picks that John Schneider has at his disposal draft weekend, that Seahawks fans are going to be happy if he only selects one offensive lineman? I think there'd be a lot of Seahawks fans who'd be, upset about that. So to me, it's just looking at the actual numbers here. And again, acknowledging the fact, and I'm not trying to be critical of either Ryan Grubb or Scott Huff or Andy Dickerson before them, but look, the proof is in the pudding, as I often like to say. I mean, they are not currently lead offensive line gurus in the NFL. I mean, Andy Dickerson wound up going to the LA Rams kind of as an assistant offensive line coach. Scott Huff, Andy Dickerson, sorry, I can't remember exactly where he went.
He's in Vegas with Pete, I believe.
Oh, yes, exactly. You're right. I apologize. Yes, he absolutely is. And then it is Andy Dickerson who wound up, Scott Huff, who wound up going to the LA Rams as an assistant offensive line coach. You're correct. I apologize. And my point is that, look, those are two quality offensive line coaches, but I don't think that the Seahawks believe that they are nearly as good as what John Benton has proven himself to be over his distinguished career. I think the Seahawks are all in on the idea that they need to have better coaching. They have already acquired the talent. They want this talent to actually become better NFL players. And that takes time. That requires a little bit of patience. And so, I think that there's a chance that Seattle's going to use number 18 overall on an offensive line. I think there's a chance they're still going to make a splashy signing or trade for a veteran. But also there's a possibility that Seattle already has their front five. Whether Seahawks fans want to hear that or not, look, it's the reality is again, John Schneider has not, he is a Seahawk that is not about to change the colors of his feathers at this point. And so I don't know that just because Seahawks fans are clamoring for the Seahawks to make a splashy move in free agency when it comes to the offensive line, that they're necessarily going to do that.
Well, they clearly were trying to with Fries. That was, and a few years back, I mentioned this, Joe Thuney, when he was originally going to Kansas City as a free agent, Seattle was very much in that at the end. And there was just a bottom line that they would not go past, and Chiefs did. And so they ended up losing out to that one. Number of factors behind not getting Fries, including the physical, as we talked about a little bit yesterday, the money stuff. There's some issues there potentially. But ultimately, Fries wanted to sign yesterday, and he agreed with the Minnesota Vikings. Jenkins is the one name that I would keep an eye on. And after that, I don't know that we're going to see any other significant moves. Maybe Lucas Patrick can reunite with Kubiak and Benton after playing for them with the Saints last year. Don't think he's going to be a guy that breaks the bank. They could at least come in as a veteran presence. But I don't necessarily see any other names that are jumping out. And again, I've heard Mekhi Becton probably not going to be a player that they're going to be looking at. But again, we'll see. These things are fluid. But it's obvious at this point they've been aggressive more so than what we've seen in the past. But they also are going to be content without throwing money at something that isn't going to be worth that investment. They're going to be content with the group they have and letting this new coaching staff that has a much more proven track record of coaching up players, let those guys go to work, as you've been arguing. And I'm with you. I think a lot of these guys deserve another opportunity with a different coaching staff to see if you can get these guys playing to their potential. I also think having a veteran in the interior, though, would be really helpful, which clearly the Seahawks have thought the same with how aggressive that they have been up to this point. We'll see what happens with Jenkins. Sounds like the Giants and Bengals are the other two teams that are looking to sign him right now. Seahawks in the mix there. We'll see if Seattle ends up landing him or not here in the next day or so. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When I return tomorrow, we'll have the latest on free agency, and as promised, we will have a mailbag. Going to get a chance to answer all the questions from you, the valued 12s. We'll get to that all tomorrow. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.